All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, one of the talking points that emerged following the aftermath of UFC 313 was to do with the state of women's MMA. And I want to talk about it, okay? We finally are starting to hear some honesty from MMA pundits regarding this issue. And that makes me very happy. I've been talking about this for a very long time, and it has been driving me absolutely insane, okay? All of this stems from the fight between Amanda Lemos and Iceman Lucindo, which was a horrible fight, and for whatever reason was featured on the main card portion of the pay-per-view. I think the issue was also exacerbated by the fact that it completely killed the buzz and the momentum of one of the best knockouts that we have seen in a very long time from Mauricio Ruffy. We even have Luke Thomas complaining about it, okay, which is crazy, considering this guy lectured a fan of his who super chatted him money, okay, for not liking Laura Sanko's voice on commentary, told his fan that he probably just hates women. So I think this opinion holds some extra weight coming from someone like him, and I'm going to be honest, I was a little bit surprised by his reaction. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to take a look at some of the reactions of this fight, or to this fight rather, the placement of it, and then the state of women's mixed martial arts in general and how it relates to men's. And I'm going to give my take on some of the things said by these guys. First, I want to play the shill reaction to all of this, okay, which is going to come from the Anik and Florian podcast. And then we'll take a look at the very legitimate criticism coming from Luke Thomas and also some from Brendan Schaub. So take a look at this first clip.
Oh, God.
I got a few other things on UFC 313, and then we'll move on. So, Bri, you know chicks or women's MMA or whatever it is, and one of our listeners wanted me to bring this to your attention. This particular listener, I'm not going to say his name, he's completely underwhelmed by the women's game, and he's very frustrated. He feels like on the Anik and Florian podcast, we don't necessarily criticize the women's game, and it is so in its relative infancy compared to the men's game that, yes, I mean, historically, there have to have been more decisions, right? You look at some of these women and they have 9, 10, 11 straight. I think about Kadol Hosa and Andrea Lee. Most of their entire UFC bodies of work are all decision fights. And Amanda Lemos over Yasmin Lucindo, I know, underwhelmed a lot of fight fans. So I'm not trying to put you guys on the spot necessarily, but there is a segment of the fan base that is a little bit getting tired of, some of the, I guess, listlessness or lack of action in these women's bouts. And it does dovetail with what I was saying, like, give me some fucking lightweight main events already.
Yeah. Okay, now, I don't know whoever that listener is that sent this into them, but they are absolutely fucking based and completely and totally correct. Okay, now it's not just John Anik and Kenny Florian who refuse to criticize women fighters or performances that are done by women fighters. This is like just part of the culture, it seems. Okay, when you look at the reaction from a guy like Dana White to Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero and compare that to Carla Esparza and Rose Namajunas, the reactions are not equal. The criticisms are a lot softer on the female side, and it's almost like we expect more of the men fighters. So when they put on a poor performance, we're a lot more willing to go after them. Okay, so it's not just these guys who won't do it, but it is true that this happens in a broader sense. Okay, now then he goes on to say, well, I think because it's in its relative infancy to the men, that's why we see more decisions. Now, I want to point out that while women were not always in the UFC, I remember watching Bodog events when I was 10 years old, and there were women fights featured in those events. So it's not like they just started fighting. Okay, that's one. Number two is I would be willing to wager that the older the sport gets, the more decisions we see. Okay, because the skill level goes up, the defense goes up, the well-roundedness goes up, and the competitors are closer in all of those areas than they once were 15 years ago. So I would imagine if you go back and see how many finishes used to happen 10, 15 years ago, I would imagine it's more than it is today. So I already disagree with his framing, but either way, let us get to the answers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, this fight wasn't great. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I see the hate. I know I saw that. I believe it was a comment or something. I saw what you were talking about. Of whoever sent you that. But I still think women can deliver fights. I think the high level women are unreal. I think even on the lower end of the men's spectrum, we're going to get some duds. And you're right. Men's MMA have been around a lot longer than women's MMA, and we're going to pop up and we're going to get some fights that are a little lackluster. And I don't understand the super negativity towards women's MMA, because I still find some really entertaining fights. You tell me Jessica Andrade is going out there have a boring fight? No fucking way, right? Yeah. Sometimes you get a stinker, and I just think some people might be making too big of a deal on this. I will agree that 100%, 155 pounds needs the headline way more. That is for sure, because it's the best division. But yeah, I just think women are getting a hard time right now with the spot. I see a lot of comments about that. There's also a famous, well, I wouldn't say famous, a pretty big handle in MMA. If you've been on Twitter for a while, he used to have a handle called Front Row Brian. It is now something different. He was very negative about women's MMA as well. But I don't see it. I still think they deliver for sure. And I thought I knew.
Okay, now immediately we get some fucking well poisoning, okay? Referring to it as hate. This is not hate, motherfucker, okay? We are sick, with all due respect, we are sick of having to watch a subpar product in between the product that we are actually here to view. I can't think of another sport where they force you to watch the women's version of that sport during an event. It is unbelievable, okay? And for those of you who want to call me a fucking incel or a sexist or some shit, when I sit down to watch fights with my fucking wife, okay, she agrees. When a women's fight comes on, the excitement level drops off, and that is just a fact, because you know that you're in for a subpar product, okay? And he's using the same bullshit, tired fucking arguments that we always hear when it comes to the state of women's MMA, and that is like, I still think the high level ones can put on great fights, and I can't think of any off the top of my head aside from Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. He didn't even fucking mention that. Bro, 5 years ago is the argument that people make when talking about women's MMA. He brings up Jessica Andrade, my guy. She's probably going to be retired soon. Okay, also, her last 2 fights did go to decisions. One was a split decision victory, and one was a decision, unanimous decision, loss. So yeah, she can put on boring-ish fights, okay? She will, and the vast majority of girls will as well. You were able to think of one lady off the top of your head that is actually entertaining, okay? So absolute fucking bullshit argument from this guy, but
they deliver for sure. And I thought I knew chicks. I'm ice cold right now. I don't know chicks anymore. I got a ton of comments to say I don't know chicks anymore, but
Kenny,
yeah, I see it though.
Amanda Lemos had to prioritize winning here, right? And to Brian's point, all these fights can't necessarily deliver. What'd you make of that fight, and what do you make about this thematically? Because it's not just that one tweet. Right. It's a lot of noise.
Sure. Well, I'll say I would maybe put the blame and the onus more on Lucindo, who I expected to strike a lot more with Lemos. And I think she found out she was not at that level, maybe didn't have the speed and power of someone like Lemos, and decided to switch things up and said, you know, I've seen Lemos make mistakes on the ground. Let me try to put this where I feel I'm stronger. And she tried to make it a grappling match and kind of failed at that. In that, her approach of being on her back and trying to set up a submission against someone like Lemos, that's not where you do it. You need to put Lemos on her back. And I think that's where she kind of failed. And I think it had the potential to be a good fight. If she decided to stand up with Lemos, I think that it would have been way more exciting. But her getting taken down on some of those failed takedown attempts, I think, is what kind of made it a slow moving fight. And for Lemos, I think she was kind of content to just get that win coming off that loss, and she just wanted another win again. So she wasn't taking unnecessary risk and trying to pass guard and look for submissions. She was just trying to stay on top and chip away with ground and pound.
All right, congrats also to Joshua Van.
Okay, now Kenny Florian should be a fucking politician, because this guy just completely dodged the question and turned it into a fight analysis. Okay, what a fucking brilliant, high IQ, big brain move from Kenny Florian there. So I want to address a couple things that I forgot to mention in the previous answer, and that is it's not so much that we, they say, yes, the men can have stinkers too, though. Like, all the fights you get are not going to be absolutely fantastic. And while that is true, right? That is true. The problem is that per capita, okay, percentage, we get way more shit fights out of the women's side than we do out of the men's side. And there's also another aspect that I don't think gets spoken about enough, is that when you are watching a fight that is low action, one that comes to mind is like Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, okay? Very little action in most of those rounds. However, you are sitting there with the anticipation, at least upon first viewing, that at any given time, something insane could happen. Wonderboy could wheel kick Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley could explode with a right hand and fucking drop Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Like, there are so many things that could happen that even in a low output men's fight, there is still a level of excitement or anticipation. Whereas with the women's side, that doesn't really exist, okay? And I don't think it's being overblown, especially when, and we're going to get into this in just a little bit, it is extremely expensive to be a UFC fan, okay? And then you get Amanda Lemos, and listen, I understand a lot of you guys don't fucking pay, but you get Amanda Lemos and Iceman Lucindo as part of a fucking pay-per-view, and Joshua Van is stuck on the prelims. Okay, either way, let us move on to Luke Thomas, who, without even knowing, just destroys everything these motherfuckers here had to say.
I'm not even going to talk about Amanda Lemos and Yasmin Lucindo. What a terrible, terrible fight. Dude, listen, I hate making this argument because MMA right now is full of dudes who just hate women. It's just full of undersexed losers. It's full of guys who hate their moms. It's full of guys who just have retrograde opinions about women. And they don't want to admit this, but it absolutely influences what kind of discussions more broadly we have about what women are doing in these spaces. But it just has to be said, dude, women's MMA is in a terrible place. It is not interesting or dynamic. Not in totality. There are clear exceptions to this. Dakota Ditcheva seems like a fucking breath of fresh air. I am definitely looking forward to Kayla Harrison fighting Juliana Pena. I think that's going to be fun. Interesting to see, what's going to happen with Harrison. There's some other ones too. Obviously, the champion, Zhang Weili, is one of the best fighters in the world. There are of course exceptions, but they're typically exceptions that prove the rule, dude. It's not even just the rank and file of the women anymore. Even the ranked ones are just so not interesting as fighters. They don't have interesting abilities. They don't have interesting fights. They don't engage in interesting style contrasts. It just is so fucking lifeless and
holy fucking based. Luke Thomas, Jesus Christ, I was not expecting this take from him when I was listening to his recap, and I was driving home and I bursted out in laughter, okay? Because even in a rant in which he is shitting on women's MMA, the way that so many of us have for so long, he still has to remind us that we are undersexed losers, okay? And I find that to be absolutely hilarious and also untrue, but that's okay. We can roll with it. I'm just glad he's talking about it, period. And all of his fan base, who are a lot of the same people that would be in your comment sections getting upset with you if you espouse this opinion, are now forced to kind of chew on it, okay? So absolutely fucking based. And also that minute and a half or so completely destroys the argument that we just heard. And it's not even the argument that we just heard, it's the argument that every single person who tries to defend the state of women's MMA makes, and that is that you still have good fighters and blah blah. Luke Thomas says the fact that the Zhang Weili and these girls, Dakota Ditcheva or whatever the fuck, the exception proves the rule, meaning you have a few who stand out, and that's it, because the rest fucking suck, Okay, so fucking lifeless. That's a direct quote from Luke Thomas. Maybe one of my all-time favorite quotes. I completely and totally agree with that sentiment, and also espoused how it's not just the rank and file, it's not just the girls outside the rankings, it is in fact the girls who are also ranked, who are completely and totally uninteresting. Okay, Amanda Lemos was ranked 5th in the world. She still is. Iceman Lucindo's in the top 10. And that's the performance that we got on the main card of a fucking pay-per-view event. What are we doing here, B? Absolutely insane. Jesus fucking Christ. He said something else that I found to be awesome, and I can't quite remember it. I can't put my finger on it. Oh, no, it wasn't awesome. Okay. One of the fighters he listed as an exception, by the way, was Juliana Pena. Now, he probably mentioned her because she's going to be fighting Kayla Harrison, who is part of the exception, I guess, even though her last fight was absolute and utter fucking dog shit, okay? And she's supposed to be this monster who just ragdolls girls and does whatever she wants to them. I know she's at the end of her career, but still, she looked like not the best in her last fight. Juliana Pena is the fucking champion right now, okay? That woman throws punches with her eyes closed, and she looks like she's performing the breaststroke. I mean, if that's an exception to the rule, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. Either way, let's move on to the rest of his take.
Lifeless and like, why? Pound for you can get a bad fight out of any weight class, male or female. You can get a bad fight out of any kind of different one, whether it's a title fight, prelims. It happens no matter what. But it feels to me like the consistency of mediocrity, boredom, and complete, utterly forgettable fighting that is happening in women's MMA right now. It feels like a 5-alarm fire, and I don't really know what the answer is to fix it, other than you have to just keep looking for other fighters and, you know, shuffling them through. I don't know. I don't know how we get around this, but the current state of it is decrepit. It is decrepit. Man, what an absolutely forgettable experience the women's MMA has. I mean, I remember the Zingano. Dude, go back and watch Miesha Tate versus Kat Zingano. And then come watch this one. You'd be like, dude, what the fuck happened?
These clips make me so happy, okay? The absolute mediocrity, boredom, and forgettableness it's so fucking ruthless, and I absolutely love it. And I love hearing it from a guy like Luke Thomas. He's opening up, okay? This is awesome. Either way, even at the end there, he kind of defeats John Anik's point earlier, that because it's so early and it's in its infancy stage relative to the men's, this is why we get such boring fights. But as Luke Thomas points out, and this kind of goes to what I said earlier about the men's fight being more exciting, or at the very least more finishes happening in the earlier stages of the sport, Luke Thomas rightly points out that if you go back and watch Miesha Tate versus Kat Zingano, there are a lot of girl fights, women's fights, that were entertaining, that did end in finishes, that were memorable. And that was earlier in its existence. So John Anik's point, in my opinion, is utter bullshit, and I think it's fucking cope. And listen, I understand that he works for the UFC, and he's going to have to be in a room with these women and interview these women, and he doesn't want to be overly disrespectful, and I understand that. But overall, I was pretty goddamn surprised by Luke Thomas here giving this take, because I wholeheartedly agree, and I've been agreeing with this for a very long time. And he says something there. He goes, I don't know how to fix it other than just looking for other fighters. And while that's fine, I don't have a problem with that, okay? In the meantime, how about you get it the fuck off the main card of a pay-per-view, yeah? Imagine the momentum that would have happened heading into the co-main event, Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev, if you had Joshua Van and his fight, then you had Mauricio Ruffy fucking wheel kick Bobby Green, and then you had Jalen Turner get subbed by Ignacio Bahamondes, and then that leads into the co-main event. That would have been unbelievable momentum, but instead what we got was Mauricio Ruffy got one of the most beautiful knockouts I have ever seen. Ever, I think. And then we had to sit through Amanda Lemos versus Iceman Lucendo. And even during the fight, the commentary team, John Anik, had negative things to say about the fight. The bell rang 5 seconds early, and John Anik thought, well, maybe the commission's had enough of this one, because it was absolute and utter fucking bullshit. Okay, now let's get to maybe the strongest criticism that I was able to find following this event, and that comes from Brendan Schaub, who I wholeheartedly agree with in this instance, at least when it comes to this topic.
So frustrating.
Pretty wild,
worst
man.
card in a hot fucking second too.
Yeah.
That fucking, even though I was watching on the dark web, that thing was fucking terrible, dude. That Amanda Lemos fight, fuck you, dude. Fuck you, Brian. You're telling me those are the two most technical and talented fighters we have in the UFC?
I saw
fuck you, dude. That shit was atrocious. That makes me want them to have a WNBA league, like Invicta, women's only, and then men's league. Fuck you. You charge me $80 and you put that garbage on the fucking main event. Those two did nothing.
Yeah.
My two kids were wrestling during that. It was more exciting and better technique.
Okay, now leave it to Brendan Schaub, of all people, to admit on his podcast to using a perfectly legal, moral, and ethical stream to watch the fights, okay? And then also complain about getting charged $80. What are we doing here, dude? You can't have it both ways, B, okay? But either way, he's correct. Not that I think UFC 313 was the worst card in a long time. I think he's wrong about that. Okay, UFC 312 fucking sucked relative to UFC 313. The prelims on 313 were fantastic, and even most of the main card was, okay? But fights like those in positions like the one we had on Saturday night on the main card of a pay-per-view, where even if you are not paying for it, just principally speaking, you are supposed to pay for a UFC pay-per-view, and they put that fucking utter nonsense on the card. It's out of this world, and Schaub is correct, okay? It makes me wish there was a WNBA for women's fighting. Now, the problem is that, like the WNBA, the men's league would probably end up subsidizing it. So it's almost just more convenient to have them in the same promotion, all under one umbrella. And I'm going to be honest, dude, it makes me a little bit angry that Ronda Rousey bursted onto the scene, okay? Because it had not been for her, we might not have women's MMA in the UFC to this day, okay? To this fucking day. But we do. And I don't know what Dana White was thinking. Did he think that he was going to be able to find a Ronda Rousey every generation for us, or what? Because it didn't fucking happen. Okay, it didn't happen. And instead, we're just forced to sit through Amanda Lemos versus Iceman Lucendo in the fucking smack dab in the middle of a pay-per-view main card. What? Okay, this is unacceptable. I think the only remedy to this is put all of the women's cards, or women's fights rather, on the early prelims, so we know when to show up. Okay, we know when to show up. Now listen, I'm not opposed to a smoke break every now and then on even the prelims, but when it's main card pay-per-view time, come on now, dude. We can't be having that. Okay, so absolutely and totally fucking base takes here from Brendan Schaub, who normally is an absolute doofus. Okay, great takes from Luke Thomas, who usually is a you know, insane progressive person who would be screeching at people giving this take. And of course, the shill argument that we listened to before is just that, the shill argument, and everything Luke Thomas says completely and totally destroys that. Either way, dude, let me know what you guys think we should do down in the comments below, okay? Because there is no other sport that forces you to watch the female version except this one. And I just, sometimes, man, I'm like, motherfucker, okay? What the fuck? Why is this fight here? It drives me up the wall. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that good shit. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.